Today, let's talk about Sudan. We're going to go way beyond the headlines to really deconstruct what's happening there. We need to understand the deep drivers of this awful conflict, and maybe more importantly, start to explore the kind of strategic thinking it's going to take to even imagine a path forward.
First, to get a handle on the sheer scale of this crisis, you have to start with the human toll. And this number, well, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. Over 12 million people. That's how many have been driven from their homes since this war really kicked off.
And I want to be absolutely clear what that means. This is not just another tragic conflict. Right now, as we speak, it is the single largest displacement crisis on the entire planet. That fact alone is why it is so incredibly urgent that we understand what's going on and how to fix it.
So, Part 1. Sudan's systemic collapse. How do you even measure a country falling apart? I mean, what does that look like in pure data? Well, for this first part, we're going to look at the numbers that try to quantify that exact breakdown.
Okay, take a look at this. It's from the Fragile States Index, and there's one number here that tells so much of the story. See that line, Factionalized Elites? It scores a 9.6 out of 10. It's practically off the charts. It's a number that quantifies the absolute core of the problem, a state that is being deliberately shattered from the very top by its own leaders in a zero-sum game for power.
And when the politics fracture like that, the economy just implodes. It didn't just shrink a little bit, it went into a catastrophic freefall. The entire economy contracted by over a third in a single year. You just can't run a country like that. You can't feed your people. There is no foundation for a future when this is your reality. All right, Section 2, a war between generals. Because this whole systemic collapse, it isn't really about some grand ideology. When you boil it all down, it's a raw, brutal power struggle, a war between two men.
So let's meet the main players. On one side, you've got General al-Burhan. He leads the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF. He's the guy in charge of the official state army, and his power comes from those institutions. What he's fighting for is legitimacy. Then, on the other side, you've got Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known everywhere as Hemeti. He leads the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, which is basically a massive paramilitary force that acts like its own state within a state. And it's all funded by his personal control over Sudan's hugely profitable gold trade. See, Hemeti isn't fighting for legitimacy, he's fighting for autonomy and cold, hard economic control. Now, here's the wild part. These two rivals, who are now trying to annihilate each other, were actually partners not that long ago. They worked together to kick out the old dictator, Omar al-Bashir, back in 2019. And they worked together again in 2021 for another coup, this time to crush a fragile civilian government. It was always just an alliance of convenience, a way for both to grab power before they inevitably turned on each other.
Next up, let's look at the engine of this conflict. Because a war this intense doesn't just keep going on its own. It needs fuel, it needs money and weapons. So the big question is, where is it all coming from?
Well, you find out pretty quickly that this war is being fueled both from the inside and the outside. Internally, Hemeti's RSF has its own ATM machine, personal control over the gold mines in Darfur. But externally, both sides are getting a ton of help. You have the UAE, who's been linked to backing the RSF, while countries like Egypt and Iran have been helping the official army, the SAF, with things like armed drones. This flood of outside support just keeps both sides fighting, locking them in a truly deadly stalemate.
And the consequences of that stalemate are just catastrophic. Analysts use tools like this, it's called a Carver matrix, to pinpoint the most severe risks. And notice the things at the very top scoring the highest possible risk: the siege of the city El Fasher in Darfur and the complete collapse of humanitarian aid. Just behind that is the disruption of the oil pipeline, which is a lifeline for both Sudan and South Sudan. These are the absolute red alert flashpoints we have to watch. So, how do you even begin to untangle a system this violent and this complex? We're going to broaden our view now and look at the actual strategic frameworks that conflict resolution experts use to try and build a path to peace. And this is really the fundamental question for any mediator, right? When you have two sides who are completely committed to winning a total victory, how in the world do you get them to even sit down at the same table? The answer isn't just about wishing for the best. It's about strategy.
So, there's this key concept called ripeness theory. It sounds academic, but it's super practical. It says that for negotiations to have any chance of success, two things have to happen. First, you need a mutually hurting stalemate. That's when both sides finally realize they can't win on the battlefield and that the cost of fighting has just become unbearable. And second, they have to see a mutually enticing opportunity, a future with a peace deal that looks way better than continuing the war. And right now, let's be real, Sudan is not yet ripe.
Now this is a huge one, and it gets overlooked all the time. Culture. A Western negotiator might come in wanting to be efficient, direct, let's cut to the chase. But in a high-context culture like Sudan's, where relationships and hierarchy are everything, that approach can feel deeply disrespectful. It can cause the talks to completely fall apart before they even start. For any mediator, cultural fluency isn't a bonus, it's a requirement.
And finally, there's the classic idea of the BATNA. It stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. Basically, it's your plan B. What's your best option if you walk away from the table? So a mediator's job is to systematically weaken the BATNA for both generals. You do that by putting pressure on the RSF's gold smuggling networks, or by chipping away at the SAF's international legitimacy. The weaker you make their alternatives, the more attractive that peace deal starts to look.
So, with all that in mind, what could a real, long-term vision for peace actually look like? In this last section, that's what we'll explore. Because this can't just be about stopping the fighting. It has to be about rebuilding an entire society.
This quote really captures the whole idea of systems thinking. You can't just come in from the outside and force some perfect solution on a country. It doesn't work. The goal is to understand the incredibly complex system that already exists and then just gently nudge it in a better direction toward what experts call positive peace.
So, what does that nudging look like on the ground? Well, the proposed Sudan ceasefire and sustainable peace strategy lays out a clear three-step roadmap. Step 1. De-escalate. Create zone ceasefires just to stop the killing. Step 2. Negotiate. And this is vital. Bring everybody to the table, not just the generals. And Step 3. Implement. That's the long, hard work of disarming fighters and actually rebuilding society.
And critically, any real plan has to recognize that you cannot have peace without justice. It's impossible. So this framework demands accountability through 4 key pillars: a truth commission to figure out what happened, a special court for war crimes, specific ways to address the horrific gender-based violence, and a reparations fund for the victims. You simply have to confront the past before you can build a future. And that brings us to what might be the single most critical piece of the entire puzzle. Any deal that is struck only between General Burhan and Hemeti is absolutely destined to fail. A peace that can actually last has to be built on a foundation of popular legitimacy. And that means civilian actors, women's groups, tribal leaders, youth activists, they have to be at the absolute center of any negotiation. They are the civilian pole that can finally balance out the military one. Which leaves us with one last, very difficult question. After decades of military rule, of corruption, of these endless cycles of horrific violence, can a system that's this broken truly be nudged back toward healing? The path forward for Sudan is going to be incredibly challenging, but understanding all these dynamics, that has to be the first step to finding an answer.